We will be hearing from Tamara Redmond with the Federal Highway Administration's Office of Safety, Carl Sundstrom with the UNC Highway Safety Research Center, Dan Neighbors with VHB, and Peter Lageray with Tool Design Group. My name is James Gallagher, and I am the PBIC Communications Manager, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Now I'd like to pass it over to Tamara.
So before we start off, I just wanted to talk about a few initiatives that are currently underway at the Federal Department of Transportation and also some new resources that the Federal Highway Administration recently completed. So late last year, the Secretary of Transportation, Anthony Fox, announced an initiative to reduce pedestrian and bicyclist injuries and fatalities through a comprehensive approach, and it addresses infrastructure safety, education, vehicle safety, and data collection. It's an 18-month-long campaign, and it has a few different components to it. The initiative began with road safety assessments currently ongoing in each state that are being organized and led by the U.S. Department of Transportation field offices. And through the duration of the 18 months, they will also be highlighting multiple resources that have come from the various agencies of the Department of Transportation, including federal highways, to help communities build streets that are safer for people walking, biking, and taking public transportation. The Mayor's Challenge is another initiative that was announced recently, and Secretary Fox is challenging mayors and local elected officials to take action to improve safety for cyclists and pedestrians over the next year. Cities that elect to participate in the challenge will be invited to attend the Mayor's Summit for Safer People, Safer Streets in March. I believe that date is March 12th. And their cities will spend a year helping their communities undertake 7 activities to improve pedestrian safety. I also wanted to talk about 2 recently completed resources developed by my agency, the Federal Highway Administration. Obviously, you all are here to hear about BIKESAFE. That's one. Another one that's relevant is a residence guide for creating safer communities for walking and biking. We had a webinar about that last week, and that's a document that includes information, ideas, and resources to help residents learn about issues that affect walking and biking conditions. It helps them also to find ways to address or prevent these problems, and it also discusses how to promote pedestrian and bicyclist safety in their communities. There's also the Road Diet Informational Guide that was recently released as well. It guides readers through the decision-making process to determine if road diets are a good fit for certain corridors. And for those of you who don't know what a road diet is, it's basically taking you know, a 4-lane road and turning it into a smaller road with bike lanes, and usually it's 2 lanes with a center turn lane, and it makes it safer for all road users, really.
Okay. Well, thanks, James and Tamara. Great. Well, so the BIKESAFE guide has been out for just a little while now, and hopefully you've had a chance to explore it on your own on the website. If not, the goal of this webinar is really to let you all become familiar with you know, what the BIKESAFE guide is, and I hope that you'll check out the guide and the resource after this webinar is complete. So the purpose of BIKESAFE is to provide an online guide for selecting countermeasures to improve the safety and mobility of bicyclists. And it's an update to the original BIKESAFE that was released in 2006. But in this case, it's designed to be used online and with mobile devices rather than as a printed version. So there's no printed edition, unlike the 2006 version. But it provides practitioners with information and tools to review and select engineering and roadway infrastructure improvements to reduce bicyclist injuries. It's comprised of 4 sections, and each of which we'll cover in varying levels today. The goal of this webinar is for you to become familiar with the features and information in the BIKESAFE guide. So let's try to really, you know, cover the high points and make sure you're familiar with everything that's in BIKESAFE. But there's a whole lot more information within the guide that you'll be able to explore on your own. So the first section of the guide that we'll cover is really that of the basic information, sort of the background information. And the idea is that this section is to help practitioners better understand the issues facing bicyclists, how to analyze crashes, and how to implement new treatments. And then really the main feature of BIKESAFE is the countermeasure section. And this includes a comprehensive list of 46 engineering, education, and enforcement countermeasure options, as well as details of each countermeasure, including its description, purpose, considerations, safety effect, and cost. And there are a few ways to access these the information on these countermeasures. And sort of one of the best ways to do that is through this expert system tool that's been developed for BIKESAFE. And so this selection system allows users to input the basic safety problems and site conditions. And then it will propose a short list of candidate treatment options that likely would be suited to address the specific bicyclist safety problem for that situation.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Carl. Your slides don't seem to be advancing.
Okay. That's fine. Yeah, we're still on the same slide.
Oh, you're still on the intro slide.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Well, there should be. Has it advanced now? Features of BIKESAFE 2014.
It's not.
Okay.
I'll pull it up on my screen.
Okay. You could try it again.
Sorry, folks, for these technical issues.
Okay. Can you see the slide that says BIKESAFE and then purpose and background?
I can, yes. We see it now. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for stopping, James. That's that's a problem. Okay, great. Well, so I'll pause here for a second so people have a chance to look at the slide. But essentially, this covers sort of the purpose that I was discussing about the BIKESAFE guide, and then the 4 different sections. And so the final piece, the final section to this are these case studies that are included as well to really show sort of the real-world implementation of these countermeasures. And so, as I mentioned, this is actually an update of the original BIKESAFE guide. So this includes information on the latest guidelines, and then links to dozens of other helpful web resources. So it's really sort of intended to be a portal to kind of give you that overview and that information of some countermeasures that may be appropriate, and then guide you to other sources of information that may be helpful for selecting that specific countermeasure. And the idea is it's based on best engineering practices, but it's not necessarily a comprehensive list of countermeasures, since the design field is constantly evolving. And there's a couple of companion pieces that we link to throughout the guide that are updated periodically as well. And one is information on the safety research for these countermeasures. So we tried that's intended to be periodically updated as new research is released. And then the other piece is a study on how much these countermeasures cost. And so there were surveys done across 40 different states on just to get a general feel for the cost of these different countermeasures. And so that's included with the countermeasure information. And so with that and with the background, I turn over to Pete, who will start going into giving some further information on the first section of BIKESAFE, which is sort of the introduction and background.
Okay. Thanks, Carl. I assume everyone can hear me. BIKESAFE has a lot of good information in the background, and I'm not going to begin to cover it all, so I'm going to just have 4 slides here that sort of introduce you to the kind of information that you'll be able to find in the introduction here to BIKESAFE. First is that everything with BIKESAFE starts and ends with a focus on safety, obviously with the safety right in the name, and you'll see that theme throughout, whether we're talking about prioritization or trying to solve different problems. It really always gets back to safety. This fits in very nicely, I think, with some of the other national trends, not only a focus on safety, but really focused on changed outcomes. In other words, we want to be smart about how we spend our time and money and really start reducing both the number of crashes and the severity of crashes. It also is consistent with, I think, the new focus on accountability, transparency, why we're doing what we're doing. So it really begins to fit in very, very nicely with what we're seeing nationally in a lot of communities. You'll notice the words in the slide here, reasonably safe for all modes. And this is, again, a very, very important step that's happening, I think, everywhere, is that we're talking about parity in terms of we really want to look at all the modes when we're talking about safety, not just one or at the exclusion of others. The other thing that I think is important to keep in mind when you look at BIKESAFE is that it's not prescriptive. And this is consistent with sort of the theme of complete streets, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it's really being thoughtful about having the right solution for the right situation. So the next slide is we're going to talk a little bit about land use. And again, what's really good about the guide, it starts to make that link between transportation and land use, and noting the direct relationship there. And we've all heard the numbers before, but things like the average bike trip is under 4 miles. 58% of all trips in the United States are less than 2 miles. And so it sort of sets it up to suggest that we could capture a lot of these trips by bicycle. And obviously, the question comes up then, why aren't there more bike trips? And so what the guide does is it talks about, it notes the fact that higher densities in general result in more bicycling and walking, but just density doesn't always result in more bicycling. And so it's a lot more than that. And so it starts talking about things like barriers that we've created, freeways, really wide, high-volume arterial streets. In general, creating a situation where the level of comfort for cyclists is very, very low. You can even have high density, but destinations can still be far away. And quite often we have very segregated land use, no mixed use, so that, again, you could live in a very dense residential area, but that doesn't mean necessarily that you're close by to the destinations that you want to go. And so the guide explores 2 different areas in terms of solutions. One is in terms of integrating land use and planning. One, it talks about retrofitting. In other words, what can you do to encourage that mixed use? How do we change our built environments over time? And then the second is, of course, with new development, where you have an opportunity to get it right in the first place. So that just gives you a quick little overview of some of the relationship issues that are discussed in the BIKESAFE. The next slide, it talks a little bit, you'll see a graph here, and it just makes the point that there's a direct relationship between speed and volume and the need to have more separation of bike facilities. Survey after survey has indicated that fear of motor vehicle traffic is the #1 barrier to increase bicycling. People just don't feel comfortable, and some of it's fear based on real numbers. If you get hit by a high-speed car, obviously you're going to have a lot more severity in terms of crashes, but also in terms of comfort. So one of the national trends that's really occurring and starting to happen fairly quickly is really recognizing the relationship that's shown on the graph here and really focusing more and more on cycle tracks, separated facilities, that kind of thing. But the flip side of it, of course, is another option is to change the streets, design the streets for slower speeds. Things like Tamara just mentioned, like road diets or traffic calming. So there can be both creating that separation in terms of the bicycle facility, but there also can be things done, to the street design to reduce the speed. So 2 different approaches, and again, that's discussed quite well in BIKESAFE. So the last slide, my little piece here, is BIKESAFE also addresses the issue of complete streets, and it really just is builds on the concept of routine accommodation. And the idea is, of course, safety and convenience for all users. And a lot of you probably heard this before, but again, it's always good to hear it, and it's in BIKESAFE. The basic idea is that you want to do the right thing for every street. It's not a prescription, again. It's really doing what's appropriate for all modes on a given street. The other thing that I like about the complete streets is encourages you to think about the entire right-of-way, not just curb to curb. So it really starts looking at sidewalk width, loading, unloading, for example, for transit, that kind of thing. It really looking at the whole right-of-way. And I just checked, and I think there's close to 500 local, regional, 27 states now have adopted some form of a complete streets policy. So this is something that's really happening nationally, and is really bringing a different kind of thought process to how we design our street systems. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Carl.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think.
Uh-huh.
Yep, I'm ready to take this from here. So thanks, Pete and Carl. So, as discussed, we said that BIKESAFE is this tool to assist in the selection of countermeasures to address bicycle safety. But that selection process, of countermeasures should follow a specific process, which is outlined on this slide. So I'll just give a quick overview and go into more detail later in the discussion. Typically, the process of addressing bicycle safety starts with bringing the right agencies, organizations, or individuals and resources together. The transportation land use planners, engineers, law enforcement officers, emergency and health services, community groups, and bicycling groups should all be engaged to address bicycle safety. Engaging these stakeholders from different disciplines can help to both identify problems and facilitate the sharing of ideas to reach consensus for implementing countermeasures. In other words, stakeholders should be engaged throughout this process. And James, can you just click? There's a graphic or animation, so it shows that it's stakeholders involved in that whole process. One more as well. So, when you do engage the stakeholders, they can help identify factors that affect bicycle safety. They can help identify what things have been done in the past, what are the needs, things that are included in reports, that are included in plans such as Strategic Highway Safety Plan, MPOs have plans, and PED bike plans. So they can bring all that basic information together. Now ideally when you're addressing safety, you would want to have some crash data as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about crash data, but that's part of that process is all I just wanted to point out. The next step shows that there are other tools that could be considered that can help define the problem or define issues that affect bicycling. And I will talk about that in a little bit more detail as well. The next bullet illustrates the importance of establishing goals to provide direction on what you hope to achieve through the process of addressing bicycle safety. Since many of the issues involving cyclists do not tie back into crash problems, broad-based performance objectives should be set. And I'll show those later in the presentation because that's a component of BIKESAFE as well. And then the last two bullets on this slide involve, first selecting countermeasures based on stakeholder input, the analysis of data, and the issues identified, and implementing those countermeasures, which is really the key piece of the process. But it's often followed by evaluating those measures in place to ensure that they are effective in addressing those issues identified. Okay, next. So now let's talk a little bit about crash data. Of course, analysis of crash data can provide information on where bicyclist crashes occur, when they occur, the characteristics of the victims involved, and other things. But one of the challenges in addressing bicycle safety is that crashes involving cyclists really tend to be widely dispersed. This can make it difficult to target specific locations for improvement. Therefore, rather than focus only on specific crash locations, common risk factors in crashes along roadways can be targeted as well. For example, if you have crash data that shows crashes involving cyclists and traffic exiting driveways, on a corridor is an issue, rather than just targeting those specific driveways where crashes occurred, you would apply a measure to address all the crashes on a corridor that show similar risks. And there's a lot of tools that can help with typing of crashes. One of those is PBCAT, the Pedestrian and Bicycle Crash Analysis Tool. That was developed by the Highway Safety Research Center and was sponsored by FHWA and NHTSA. And basically, that has more than 70 bicyclist crash types that can be categorized into 20 crash typing groups to help analyze trends or commonalities in crashes. Several of these groups have been combined into the 14 BIKESAFE groups for the purposes of selecting treatments, which we'll discuss through today's presentation as well. Okay, so here you see annotating the crash data. When crash data are available, it should be mapped with other information to identify high-risk locations or factors affecting bicycle safety. In the graphic, you can see, if you just click through these, James, there's 4 clicks. You see land use, severity, crash type, and crash locations, geometry, and then traffic. So you look at all of these factors together, and you look for common elements, and that's how you can identify trends. Okay, next. So what other tools are there that can help identify crashes? Well, one of those are audits and assessments. And as we discussed, since these bicycle crashes fortunately tend to be widely dispersed, mapping may not provide a lot of detailed information in terms of the problems. So some of the methods that can be employed are by using bikeability checklists. PBIC has a bikeability checklist that you can find on their website. You can also conduct road safety audits, a bicycle road safety audit. Basically, a road safety audit is defined as a formal safety performance evaluation of an existing or future road or intersection by an independent, multidisciplinary team. RSAs are effective because they help engage this diverse team to identify issues by actually riding on the road. That's one of the things that is suggested through the FHWA guidelines. And you see right here, that's just an illustration of the FHWA guidelines that are available for conducting bike RSAs. Okay, next. So another tool is level of service, and level of service tools can help measure the operational characteristics of bicycle facilities. The 2010 Highway Capacity Manual has probably one of the most well-known methodologies for calculating bicycle level service, and it's based off of bicycle operations as well as the perceived user safety. So that's kind of a newer element that was added in the 2010 version of the HCM. If you click one, James, you'll see there's level of services that are appearing. One of the neat features, and one more click about, or one of the interesting features of the 2010 HCM is that it combines link level service, that's like a link between two intersecting streets, and intersection level service to provide an intersection level service. Now, a lot of agencies haven't been using this. They're continuing to use the link level service. That's the section between two intersecting roads. But there are other methodologies that are that can be used beyond this highway capacity manual methodology, such as Florida DOT has a LOS plan, quality level of service model, and there's a bicycle level of stress model, just to name a few. But the link level service models seem to be much more widely used by agencies. So next. So since you do have that gap, intersection analysis tools can be employed to help determine safety at intersections. And one of these, which you can see is depicted here on the screen, is the pedestrian bicycle safety indices. Those were developed by Highway Safety Research Center and sponsored by FHWA. And basically what they do, they're determined by calculating a separate value for pedestrian bicycle crash potential on each approach to an intersection. So the data required to calculate these are typically readily available, making it an easy-to-use assessment tool. And some of those things that are fed into the model are traffic speed, traffic volume, roadway width, which is really a number of lanes, traffic control, and other intersection characteristics. They can be used to help provide a relative assessment for safety at intersections and help prioritize improvements. So next. So all this can be pulled together by using geographic information systems software. And you can see here there's a few things that are illustrated. And if you just click through this right now, it's I think probably like 4 clicks. You'll see ISI is the Intersection Safety Index, and that can be color-coded by the severity. Crashes, and you see there's icons for bicycle crashes. Next, you'll see level of service. The roadway can be color-coded, so you know the level of service on links. And then you can have inventory, too, of off-road facilities and gaps in the bicycling network. So you look at all those things together, and you see where there's a combination of those different things, and those are your critical areas where you want to prioritize your improvements. Okay, next. So this is an excerpt from BIKESAFE that shows the crash type matrix, or it shows an excerpt of it. And you look at down the side, and those are the issues that the crash types that you might have. And then the rows, or the columns, excuse me, shared roadway, on-road bike facilities, intersection treatments, etc. Those are the 8 categories of countermeasures in BIKESAFE that you can find the countermeasures. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see like the whole diagram there. So you see all the crash types with those 8 major categories by which countermeasures are categorized. Now, just a little side note here is my son was looking at me reviewing this last night, and he goes, "Dad, are you playing Minecraft?" So this has nothing to do with a game here, but it's a matrix that shows you the locations where there's an X. That's where those crash types would be addressed by that specific category, countermeasure category, and where it's a grayed out cell, that's where it wouldn't be addressed. So next. And this is just what I had briefly mentioned before. This is the performance objective matrix, which has, again, the 8 categories of countermeasures. And then on the rows, the objective type, instead of being crash issues, these are the performance objectives that you could achieve by applying countermeasures in one of these 8 categories. And if you go to the next slide, you just see the whole matrix. So that's kind of a brief rundown in terms of how you use BIKESAFE to find or solve some of the issues that you might have in addressing bicycling safety. And next, I think I'll pass it back to Carl to talk about some of the specific countermeasures.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So that's a great overview of how to identify where these problem areas may be, and understanding a bit more about the kind of the root causes of bicycle safety and how we can address those. So given the constraints of just one webinar, it's certainly it's a big topic, and so I'll definitely encourage you to go to BIKESAFE itself and read through some of those sections, which provides much more discussion on the topic. But the next section here are the countermeasures themselves, and so as I mentioned at the start, there are 46 different mostly engineering, but also some education enforcement countermeasures used within BIKESAFE, and so they're categorized within 8 sections, and that's what we'll be presenting on here. And again, this is the list isn't intended to be comprehensive. We know that new countermeasures continue to be developed, and we follow that research carefully. And so I wouldn't encourage you again to find the countermeasures that are most suitable for your specific crash problems and site conditions. And hopefully it's on this list, but in a couple of years from now there may be another great countermeasure that may not be included. So just something to keep in mind. And again, there are cost estimates provided if if we were able to uncover any cost estimates, and of course those can vary considerably. And then there's also a research summary provided in a companion report. So we do link to those, to that information within each one of these countermeasure descriptions. And so now Pete and then Dan will talk us through these different eight different sections of countermeasures.
Okay, thanks, Carl. Yeah, as was mentioned, the countermeasures, the 46 countermeasures, are grouped into 8 different areas, and one of them is the shared roadway. And I'm not going to go through this whole list. You'll see the 2 highlighted ones there, parking treatments and driveway improvements. I'm just going to touch base on those 2 as an example of the kind of information that you'll find in BIKESAFE. So the first one here on parking treatments, if we could. Now, again, this is a very Cliff Note version of what you'll actually find in BIKESAFE. But the basic pieces are: it starts with a description, and quite often it has a picture, and also it's not shown here, but very often there's also a sketch or a drawing. And in this case, it shows you kind of a before and after cross-section to give you a sense of what you might be doing to create this back-and-angle parking. So it talks about the purpose, and you can see here it talks about conflicts between pedestrians and parking. But it also, people backing out, not being able to see. But it also gets into some of the other pros and cons of this kind of a treatment. For example, if you're putting something in the trunk, you're on the sidewalk. Or if kids are getting out of a car, the door opens and they can only go toward the sidewalk. And so it goes through some of the considerations. And then has a little bit of the cost, and it's a wide range, as you can imagine. Quite often the numbers that are given, because each situation is so different, but it gives you a sense of scale related to cost. And then considerations. And purposely did not use words like exceptions or things like that. This is really just the thinking part. Sometimes we say it's bringing good engineering judgment, good planning judgment, if you will, to the thinking. And again, it's where you can have that discussion and that thought process about some of the pros and cons. And so you can see here, some of them are listed. Again, this is just a little sampling in the actual BIKESAFE. On this particular treatment, there's going to be a lot more information on considerations as well. So the next one is on driveway improvements. And again, this was alluded to earlier. This was one of those kinds of treatments that you can do on a whole corridor. And again, because crashes quite often occur in patterns or in corridors, maybe not at a location, this is the kind of thing that you could do for an entire corridor, some access management, consolidating driveways. So again, the description, purpose, reducing the number of conflict points. You can see all the little X's and reduce conflict points between the left and the right side here. Again, it discusses costs and then considerations. And obviously when you do something like this, it can be great for reducing the number of conflicts, but there also could be other issues if, for example, you add the median and people can't make left turns anymore and you need to access businesses. So a lot of different considerations. And again, what's nice about this is that it just walks you through all these different things, so it helps to have a thoughtful conversation about what you're proposing to do. Then the next area, and again, we're looking at just grouping the countermeasures. A second one is on-road facilities, and you can see the list here again of some of the different kinds of on-road facilities that are offered in BIKESAFE. So why don't we just go to the next one? I'll give another example here. The next slide is shows the separated bike lanes, and so again, you can see the picture here. A little while ago, I talked about the relationship between average daily traffic and speed and number of lanes and needing more separation as those things go up. And a lot of times, this separation is doing things like this. This is like a one-way cycle track, and or a separated bike lane or buffered bike lane. Different words are being used, but nonetheless, I think you look at the picture and get the idea. And again, it describes it, the purpose, talks about the cost, and then the considerations. And obviously, there's issues here of visibility, driveway crossings, those kinds of things. When you come to an intersection, you may need bike signal heads. They may be appropriate. So it really starts to walk you through all the considerations and really, again, helps with that thinking process. So the next one, if we could go one forward here, is just related to maintenance. And I think this is particularly important. I think quite often it's overlooked. And depending on what survey you look at, 60 to 90% of people who fall while riding a bike and need medical attention just fall off for whatever reason. And a lot of times it's related to maintenance, either things you don't see or just buildup of sand or something on a trail or whatever the case may be. And so really focusing on the maintenance is really critical to safety. And it talks about short-term maintenance. Another way to say it is maybe annual maintenance, and that's things like sweeping and cutting back the vegetation, filling cracks and potholes, that kind of thing. And then major maintenance, like you see on the right here, like replacing a larger piece of a trail that needed replacement. So again, it really discusses that, and I think in a very good way shows how important this is for your overall safety in your community. And then finally, if we could go one more slide here, there's a lot of information in BIKESAFE about traffic calming, and you can see some of the items listed here. Probably familiar with most of these things like mini circles, chicanes, traffic diversion, and obviously some of these things can be also tied in with if you're doing a bike boulevard or you're doing a greenway, whatever you're working on. This again provides a lot of good guidance, and so for each one of the things listed here, you're going to find that same level of detail of guidance in terms of what are the pros and cons, what are the considerations, what are the costs, where should you use them, that kind of thing. What kind of crashes are these measures going to address? So that, Carl, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Pete. This is Dan. I'll start by talking about intersection treatments. And as you can see, for this category, there's 6 different treatments that are included in intersections, and I'll focus on 2 of those, curb radius and intersection markings. So go to the next slide, please. So Pete described, what the layout of the information is for each of these different countermeasures. The description purpose being just things that orient people to what we're talking about. So, for curb radius reduction, we're talking about, motor vehicles making high-speed turns, and the fact that those pose problems for bicyclists as well as pedestrians. So, the higher speed turns are typically made possible by wide corner radii, which can also create portions of undefined space on the roadway. And you look at some of the considerations. Curb radii are established based on the anticipated design vehicle of the roadway, and that's basically, what is the type of vehicle that is anticipated to use that facility, such as a bus, a truck, emergency vehicles, and things of that nature. And these are usually set by local design standards and policies, and often determine. Those local standards and policies often determine that curb radius in an intersection, but there's really an opportunity sometimes to revisit those policies based on changes in travel patterns, shifting travel modes, like more bicyclists or pedestrians on the roadway, and redevelopment. So overall, one of the recommendations that's in BIKESAFE for this is to use the smallest actual curb radii that can accommodate all road users. All right, so let's go to the next one. Yep, intersection marking. This is a pretty broad category here because there's quite a few things that fall under this. But basically, a large percentage of crashes and conflicts between bicyclists and motor vehicles occur at intersections. Intersection pavement markings includes things such as dashed lines, the use of green-colored pavement, such as shown in the photo right here, and other kinds of markings, such as the experimental bike box. All these things can be applied to improve the awareness and visibility of intersections, and they're all discussed in the context of providing intersection markings. A few examples I'll provide in terms of some of those that I just went through. Dashed lines. Those are used to indicate the proper path of a bicyclist through an intersection where a through bikeless movement overlaps with the right turn lane. Green-colored pavement may be used for similar crossing paths and weaving areas, and the purpose of this is to increase the awareness and safe behaviors by both cyclists and motorists. And in 2011, the FHWA issued an interim approval for the use of green-colored pavement within the marked bike lane and where bike lanes continue through intersections. It should be noted, too, that you see other colors, too, but those other colors were not approved for use. So green is the color that is what the FHWA has issued. There's other kind of markings, too, that are available in intersections. The experimental bike box, I think a lot of you are probably familiar with what that looks like. Basically, it's an extension to the bike lane at the head of an intersection, and is intended to improve the visibility of bicyclists at an intersection. The box, it allows bicyclists to get in front of the traffic queuing during a red signal, and then proceed when the traffic signal changes to green. And Pete had mentioned this too. With a lot of these things, there's pros and cons, and those are listed in BIKESAFE. And for excuse me, for the bike box, for instance, the installation of the right turn on red prohibitions are needed, which can reduce the overall capacity of the intersection. So there's some operational effect of these as well. Okay, next. Another category is trails and shared use paths, and you can see that there's three different categories there: separate shared use paths, path intersection treatments, and shared path treatments. And I'll touch on a few of these. Separate shared use paths are paved bidirectional pathways. Ideally, they'll follow a separate course from the roadway and have very few crossing roadways, because paths that are immediately adjacent to roadways may cross numerous intersecting roads and driveways that create conflicts for path users. So there's information that provides, how to, what are the key features that you want to see in a separated shared use path. Path intersection treatments, this is a big one. Intersections between roadways and shared use paths may present challenges, especially since you're dealing with not only bicyclists and a wide range of bicyclists, but also slower moving pedestrians, and they all need to be accommodated. And it provides guidance, in terms of where you can find some basic information. One of those is the AASHTO Bicycle Facilities Guide, and that provides design guidelines for path intersection crossings. And then, one of the fundamental principles of those crossings is that traffic control device, either a sign or signal, should be installed at all pathway intersections and should send a clear message to path and roadway users alike. So that's just kind of a touching on some information that's available for shared use paths. Okay. Next, we have the category of marking signs and signals. And as you can see, there's 8 measures in this, so it's a pretty hefty portion of the manual of BIKESAFE. And we'll focus on a couple of them. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Starting with bike-activated signal detection. So at signalized intersections that require users to be detected to call in the green phase, detection should be present to accommodate bicyclists. Properly designed detection can help deter incidences of red light running and other undesired behaviors by reducing delay and waiting time in signalized intersections. There's 2 basic types that are covered in BIKESAFE of detection, that is, and that's active and passive detection. Active detection requires the user to activate the signal phase through a push button. However, you shouldn't expect bicyclists to leave the roadway to actuate that signal. So for that reason, passive detection is often preferred. And passive detection is when a signal system automatically detects the presence of a user. The most common method is what's used for vehicle detection technology predominantly, and that's the loop detector, which you can see pictured on this slide. That could be used to service bicycles as well. Additional detection devices are also discussed in BIKESAFE, and that includes video detection, microwave detection, and these are things that are being continually updated as well. So, this is one of those dynamic areas where technology is really going very rapidly. Bicycle activated signal detection is talked about, and it also talks about a few other things too, because that's not only used to prompt or to activate a signal, but it could also be used to extend a phase to allow a bicyclist to clear an intersection. And this is used in some locations with pedestrians as well. Okay, next. So bicycle signal heads. Bicycle signal heads are an additional traffic control device installed in a signalized intersection to provide guidance and right-of-way to control bicyclists only. And bicycle signal heads can be the standard signal lenses that you see in the roadway or lenses with bicycle signals. And this photo here, it kind of shows both of them. Where in the foreground, that's the bicycle symbol signal head, and in the background you see the sign that says bike signal, and that's probably your standard lens right there. The 2012 AASHTO guide for development of bicycle facilities indicates that the 3-lens use that you see in the background is applicable. FHWA has issued an interim approval on the optional use of bicycle signal heads with yellow, green, and red bicycle symbols, which is the picture in the foreground. Bicycle signals are useful at intersections with bicycle-specific movements, such as counterflow bike lanes or separated bike lanes, to indicate the right-of-way for the separate bicycle movement. They're also useful in intersections where bicycle movements need to be separated from conflicting vehicular movements, and providing bicyclists their own phase would be helpful. That happens at conditions where there's maybe high turning volume traffic. And there's a few other conditions. I'll maybe just touch on one other. A bicycle signal can also be used at intersections with high bicycle volumes where bicyclists would otherwise follow a pedestrian indication, such as a shared use path crossings. Okay. Oops, we're moving around here.
Yeah, sorry about that. It dropped out of the PowerPoint. Let's see if we're back in. Are we back in?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay.
All right, so this is just the last slide I have, and this is the other countermeasures categories, which includes kind of a wide range of things: law enforcement, education, transit access, landscape and aesthetics, and wayfinding. And it provides the same information on each of these. Again, this is just kind of a catch-all category, but it provides the description of each of these, purpose and cost. And as we all know, education and enforcement, those are 2 of the 4 E's of safety, so there's some good materials there. And let's find some materials on these other aspects too that kind of show, what are some of the latest and greatest things that agencies are employing in some of these areas. So that's kind of a really quick run-through of some of these countermeasures. Again, as you can see, there's quite a few of them. And there's quite a bit of material that relates to these countermeasures that's provided through BIKESAFE. So I'll turn it back to Carl, I believe.
Yes. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so following on the Countermeasures overview there, as Dan pointed out, there are quite a few countermeasures in there, and a lot of good information and descriptions of each countermeasure and whether or not it may be applicable. So just to give everyone a brief overview of the website and some of the different ways to arrive at the countermeasures themselves. So this is just a screenshot of the BIKESAFE web page itself. In case you have not been to it before, you can see it's essentially grouped into two bigger sections. There's the guide with some of the background, analysis, statistics, implementation, a lot of the stuff we covered at the beginning, and then the countermeasures section as well. And then off to the right, you can find the links to the case studies and some of the other resources. And so we covered some of the background and trends earlier. So this is just another screenshot of what that looks like in the website itself. But one of the best ways to get to the countermeasures and to narrow down that list is using this expert system selection tool. And so it really starts by having you enter the location and some basic safety problems and site conditions, and just to get a better sense of what the problem is that you're trying to address. So there's 3 steps to the process where you name the location, you select your goal of treatment, whether that's trying to reduce traffic speeds, volumes, maybe you're having a problem with a specific crash type. So that type of information is in there, and then you describe the site itself, whether it's what are the traffic volumes, speeds, what's the land use context. All that goes into this selection tool. So just as an example here, you can see this example is asking the crash type is to provide safe on-street facilities, space for bicyclists. And in this case, we selected it as an urban location with the principal arterial of medium speed, 31 to 44 miles an hour, etc. And what comes out of this tool is this sort of the short list, this whittling down of all of the countermeasures into ones that may be appropriate for your situation. So there's a bunch of candidate treatment options here. And so this list actually, since I selected one about creating space for bicyclists, this list, as you might expect, would be quite long. In other cases, the list would be much shorter. But you can see here that these are all the different countermeasures that came up from the expert system. And then you can click on each one to read more about that specific countermeasure. Another way to access the countermeasures is this matrix that Dan showed earlier. And so you can look here at something, shared roadway and provide safe on-street facilities for bicyclists. If you click on that, it'll pull up all the countermeasures that may be appropriate for that given condition. So the two different matrices that are provided are another way to get at these countermeasures and kind of pull that list down a little bit. Finally, you can just browse. So this shows those 8 different groupings on the website. So shared roadway is presented here, and again, you can just click on the countermeasures directly if you just want to browse all the countermeasures that are provided in BIKESAFE. So there's several different ways that you may want to approach the use of BIKESAFE and addressing your specific crash problems and concerns. And then finally, this is only briefly mentioned, but there are quite a few case studies, and so these case studies are linked from the countermeasures themselves and can also be browsed directly on the website. If you just click on the case studies link, you can browse based on crash type or location, and that will pull up some really great, pretty in-depth case studies on how some of these countermeasures were used and any sort of data and information that we have on that, as on how successful that countermeasure was for that given condition. And then finally, once you've gone through this process and identified a countermeasure, you need to have the right implementation strategy. So I'll let Pete finish out this section, the final section here on implementation of the countermeasures in BIKESAFE.
Yeah, thanks. One of the things that BikeSafe does a very good job of is just, it doesn't just leave you with the countermeasures, but it gives you a lot of ideas for actual doing implementation. The first area that it covers is just how do you set priorities. And again, you'll see safety on the top of the list. And it talks about understanding what are the types of crashes that are occurring, where they're occurring, and then applying the appropriate countermeasures. So again, it's a way of letting you pick all the locations and narrowing them down to the ones that you want to focus on. It also talks about accessibility, and that's a theme that we hear a lot of when you're doing bicycle planning. And a lot of times it has to do with creating a connected network, connecting greenways, connecting corridors, being able to get to destinations, something I mentioned earlier. So again, that can be a way, as you do implementation, of prioritizing where you want to make your improvements. And again, in BikeSafe, there's a full discussion on this. And this is really just, again, to whet your appetite and kind of point you in a direction of some things you might want to think about. A third one, of course, is aesthetics. And I think a lot of times we forget about this one, but we really want to create great communities, great places to live. And so it talks about things like landscaping, lighting, public art, those things that really make our communities livable. And then finally, equity is becoming more and more important in many, many communities, just about everywhere, really looking at things like geographic balance, the mix between, say, urban, suburban, rural, identifying traditionally underserved neighborhoods, looking at things like car ownership, and then also looking at things like health equity. So there's a lot of different areas under equity, but that's becoming more and more important as, again, we look at focusing our resources and really being thoughtful and purposeful about where we want to spend our money. Now this next slide talks just a little bit about funding. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but and certainly not going to go through the list of funding sources right now. But just a couple things. One is just the importance of public involvement and a consensus on priorities. And quite often, funding becomes an issue when there's disagreement. And the more there's a community consensus that something is really important to be done, the more opportunity there is to be able to find the funds to work on those particular projects. It also talks about just the fact that funding is hard work. It takes a lot of dedication. It's not a magic bullet, but we do know is that a lot of communities are finding funds for both bicycle and walking projects. And what I always find interesting, too, is that it's not necessarily related to the wealth of the community. It really has to do more with your priorities and community consensus and deciding where to spend your funds. Another common denominator, if you will, a ingredient of success, is that most projects have a spark plug, and I mean by this is a person or two that makes things happen. And it just talks about how you nurture those spark plug type people and how you bring them along, and just noting again that every trail, every park, all the wonderful good things in your community usually had one or two people who were really pushing it and making it happen. And then finally, it talks quite a bit about leveraging and sort of how do you do that and sort of gets you thinking in that mode. So, for example, if you had a grant from a local foundation, you could use that as a matching funds for, a TA Transportation Alternatives project, something like that. But it really tries to get you thinking in terms of taking all the resources you have and leveraging them for additional resources. The next slide, it just talks about some implementation strategies. And again, you've heard some of this before, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but just again, BikeSafe is really good on this, and it gives you some good framework for how to think about this. Again, it talks about routine accommodation, complete streets, discussions about how you do piggybacking on other projects. It talks about, for example, resurfacing projects. When a street is resurfaced, an opportunity to do the striping differently, get those bike lanes in, really looking at all capital projects for opportunities for piggybacking, and even suggesting things along the lines of looking at where there's public and private utilities planned in the future. Anything that needs a linear corridor, there's an opportunity to build a sidewalk, to build a trail, to do something to improve both bicycling and walking. Another area that it discusses is developer requirements. Quite often this is a little more on the pedestrian side, things like sidewalks, but also some of the trade-offs. It talks about, for example, maybe you can go with narrower streets and have sidewalks and it still takes up that same amount of space and maybe even cheaper. It also just talks about annual programs, the importance of having sort of little small wins in your community and things that are, again, visible, things that create that momentum. So, for example, you could have a spot trail replacement program or a sidewalk replacement program, curb ramp program, annual programs to replace signs. You could have a spot improvement program where people, send in a request, or a pothole program. Again, the focus on this is always to be responsive, build that momentum, that public support, and again, the focus is always on safety. And then finally, we're seeing a lot more public-private partnerships. Quite often they involve different community development corporations, neighborhood groups, grants from foundations, direct industry support if you happen to have that in your community, and then just a lot of times individual citizens who are getting involved in their community. So a lot of different angles here, if you will, and a lot of success stories. And of course, the success stories are written up too in BIKESAFE because it has all the examples. So Carl, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Pete and Dan. And so, as you can see, there's a lot to BIKESAFE, and hopefully this gave you a great overview of BIKESAFE and what this guide is and how you can use it. We were only able to pick a selection of information to really cover in any sort of detail. But again, I hope you found this valuable, and that you go to BIKESAFE, to the website, and explore it more and use it as much as you see that would be valuable for you and your community and agency. So with that, we'll send it back to James for some discussion.
Thank you, Carl, Dan, Peter, and Tamara for your presentations. If you have not done so already, please go ahead and enter any questions you have into the question box, and we'll try to get to them during this Q&A session. I do want to remind everyone that the presentation slides and a recording of the webinar will be posted to pedbikeinfo.org/webinars. Slides should be there tomorrow. The video recording will be in a week or two. Also, I've gotten some reports that that people are having trouble accessing pedbikesafe.org. And as soon as this webinar is over, I'll be talking with our IT guys to make sure it's working. It appears to be working at my end, but I have gotten a couple reports, so I'll be checking on that. So the first question I got is, could you explain a little bit to some people what a bicycle boulevard is?
Sure. Since I touched on that, why don't I just start? It's really designed to use what we call low-stress streets or residential streets and kind of stringing them together. And really, quite often, the intended audience is people are a little less confident and don't want to be on the busy arterials. So usually the basic idea there is to both calm the traffic, in other words, slow it down a little bit, and in some cases, and you've got to be very careful with this, is to divert some of the traffic onto other streets. Quite often, it's designed so the cyclists don't have to stop, for example. They can just continue through, and it's not designed to make it easy for motor vehicles just to charge through. The biggest challenge with bike boulevards, and they're also called neighborhood greenways quite often, is whenever you get to a major arterial street, you've got to be able to cross that street and figuring that out. And that can be a challenge quite often. I've seen communities direct their bike boulevards to locations where they also maybe have school crossings, for example, might already have a signal there or something to help people get across, hawk signal, whatever the case may be, but you got to be creative in it. So yeah, it's something that's, I think, increasingly popular, and being used by a lot of communities.
All right, great. Thank you very much. The next question is, are crash reduction factors provided for each of the countermeasures?
No, unfortunately, unfortunately they're not, and the reason for that is because there isn't the research out there. So if the research is there, we included it, but it can be quite challenging because in order to develop a crash reduction factor, the research has to be focused on crashes, and that can involve a lot of time and money to develop sufficient sample sizes. So I would encourage you. There's a great website called the Crash Modification Factors Clearinghouse. So if you go there, you can search by bicycle and review all that information, as well as the research summary that's provided as part of BIKESAFE.
All right, thank you. Do you know if there's any types of bicyclist and motorist education that has been determined to be effective or the most cost efficient?
I'll just make a note, and this was something, Carl, I think you guys were involved in Florida a few years back, and did some targeted education, and so I think and it was very successful. I think it was in the Miami-Dade County area, and what we found out is that when you do education, it has to be targeted with very specific messages. In other words, general education about be safe does not work very well, but messages that direct you to take certain kinds of behavior work really well. So, for example, telling kids to stop at the curb, left, right, left, it's very specific information, and it needs to be targeted at a particular behavior, at a particular age group, and that's where they had some amazing results and some really good outcomes. So there are some models out there.
Yeah, and James, you may be able to build on answer some of this question too. But another example that could be useful is in North Carolina. There's the NCDOT has a Watch for Me NC program called watchformenc.org is the website, and it's a combination of different education, messaging, and enforcement operations. And so those are paired together, and that's based off of the research of what the crash problems are and how to best address that.
All right, thank you guys. The next question I got is, in dealing with higher speed and volume corridors, do you know if TAP funds can be used for placing bike facilities on an adjacent parallel non-federal aid eligible roadway?
Is that a question for Tamara to answer?
I think we probably should punt on that one and get back on that one, because that's kind of a nuanced question. I can think of a lot of different permutations of it, so probably set that one aside.
All right. Going back to the conversation about maintenance, does the cost element take into account maintenance?
I'm not sure quite what that means, but I'll just make a couple comments about costs and maintenance. The best thing you can do, of course, is to design it correctly in the first place. Certainly my experience has been that a lot of maintenance issues are water-related, and quite often those water-related issues happen because there was some sort of cheating on the design of it in the first place, and not really designing the water systems and taking care of all that in the beginning, and then it results in maintenance problems later. So I think in terms of saving money over time is build it right in the first place, and then secondly is really focusing on the short-term maintenance so you don't end up with that very expensive long-term maintenance. And short-term means doing things like keeping the drains clean, that kind of thing, keeping the sand off the trails and the bike lanes, sweeping all the things that are going to make the life cycle of your facility last longer.
Great, thanks, Pete. A mention was made of a level of service analysis tool that was dated in 2010. Can you remind us what that tool was?
Yeah, that was the 2010 Highway Capacity Manual. And the Highway Capacity Manual, it provides not only bicycle level service analysis, but pedestrian and vehicle and bus. So it provides level analysis tools for all modes. And it's a multimodal level service analysis tool that is kind of new in the 2010 HCM. And as I mentioned too, that there's a lot of agencies that are using some of these other methods because quite frankly, the 2010 HCM is Highway Capacity Manual analysis for pedestrians and bicyclists is rather data intensive. So if for people that are doing kind of more of a planning level analysis, then you have other tools that are less data intensive that provide some good information that gives you some comparative measures as to where improvements might want to be looked at to make roadways more bikeable. One of those that is pretty basic but good that I mentioned is that bicycle level of stress model, which just has 3 or 4 inputs. So it's pretty simple. So there's different tools that are used in different ways based off of the decision that you're trying to make. If it's more planning, then some of these other tools are good, and if it's much more specific, then some of the more finite level service analysis tools are maybe more appropriate.
All right, thank you. Do you know if there are any known conflicts between what is information provided in BIKESAFE versus what is provided in PEDSAFE?
Known conflicts?
I was just going to say, I'm real familiar with PEDSAFE, and I can't think of any conflicts offhand. I'm sure if one looked hard, maybe there would be one. But the general approach that I think I like to always suggest is in some ways you start with the PEDSAFE first, and if you do things right for pedestrians, a lot of that will spill over to helping bicyclists, and not 100%, but I think it's more like if you do it right for pedestrians, it helps the bicyclist. But whereas if you do things for the bicyclist in the street, it doesn't always spill into the pedestrian area as much, though they certainly complement each other. But so, for example, when you're looking at, say, signal timing on a trail, you're going to do the signal timing to accommodate the pedestrian first, and then it automatically is going to work for the bicyclist. So there is those synergies that I think you really want to be aware of.
All right, thank you.
I was just going to add, so and there are some of the countermeasures, as you'd expect, are the same in both PEDSAFE and BIKESAFE, but the descriptions and sort of their application may be different, as to the specifics relating to how pedestrians and bicyclists behave. But there is some overlap as far as the countermeasures themselves.
Off the top of your head, can you think of any examples where you might find the same countermeasure in both PEDSAFE and BIKESAFE?
Curb radius reduction is one.
Mm-hmm. I think like road diets are in both, I believe, and maybe roundabouts. There's some overlap.
Yeah, curb radius reduction was another one I had mentioned.
Yep, and traffic calming, I believe. So yeah, there are quite a few that are in both.
All right, thank you. Next question I got. State DOTs are using the AASHTO Highway Safety Manual, but tools like BIKESAFE and PEDSAFE aren't getting used as much. How do you change that approach to get BIKESAFE and PEDSAFE used more frequently?
Well, I think the AASHTO guides are, in general, they're kind of more required. Ours are just guidelines. I mean, the AASHTO documents you're supposed to follow. So, I mean, if you have to follow something, then obviously it's going to get more attention. I don't know. Anybody else have anything they want to add?
Well, no, I mean, obviously we're in the area here of choices, and you know, a lot of things in BIKESAFE and in PEDSAFE complement and enhance what's already in AASHTO and MUTCD, those kinds of things, and so it really is it sort of takes you that next step, but we're very careful not to have contradictions in different directions. So it's a choice that you want to go into another level, and you know, as Tamara mentioned, it's not something that it's a requirement. It's a choice, and you have to choose to do that.
Yeah, and I'll just add that a tool like BIKESAFE, you know, will often send you to the AASHTO guides or MUTCD for further information. So, you know, once you've identified some countermeasures and you want you know further information, you may go to those guides, and those, of course, are linked to from BIKESAFE itself. So certainly it's not an either-or situation.
All right. And like I said, if you have a question, please go ahead and enter the question box. And we have time for one, maybe two more questions. Is there any guidance on the preferred width of separation when cycle tracks are separated by concrete curved barriers, and how wide should those curves be?
One of the offices of the Department of Transportation is actually creating a research. They have a research project going on right now, and maybe they'll have some answers to that question when it's finished. But I don't know. Does anybody else?
Yeah. Again, this is Pete. You know, you're absolutely right. That kind of design detail is, I think, emerging, and I think State of Massachusetts is moving forward with a higher level of detail, and other communities are as well. And that's probably something as it becomes available, we should you know, get on the website and make sure everybody has access to it.
Yeah, and so right, and so some of that information is available. So the NACTO guides, like the Urban Bikeway Design Guide, would have some of that information. And then what Tamara mentioned, which will be the Federal Highways Separated Bike Lane Planning and Design Guide, should be out sometime this spring, and that'll also provide additional information on different buffer widths for separated bike lanes.
Carl, you mentioned the NACTO Urban Bikeway Design Guide. How does BIKESAFE compare to that?
Well, so that is more of a design guide, whereas BIKESAFE itself is more of a countermeasure selection tool. So some of the countermeasures that are listed and that you may come across in BIKESAFE will be included in the NACTO design guides. So you could go there to see further information about those countermeasures, or maybe a combination of the different countermeasures. So actually the discussion earlier about bike boulevards is a good example, where NACTO provides further design guidance on bike boulevards, which essentially is a combination of different countermeasures that are included in BIKESAFE. So BIKESAFE may come up with different traffic calming countermeasures or diversion countermeasures, and those could be combined into a bike boulevard. And that's the type of information that you could find in something like the NACTO guide.
Okay. My next question is, many of the potential bike riders are not represented by organized groups that are frequently defined as stakeholders used in planning outreach efforts. How do you suggest reaching and or addressing the needs of these anonymous users or potential users?
Well, that's a whole nother webinar on public involvement question. reaching some of the folks who don't maybe participate in clubs or organized ways can be a challenge. Some of just the 30-second answer is I think some of the things that people are looking at is obviously there's a lot of web-based ways of getting a lot of information. There's public meetings. There's also a lot of times just going to neighborhoods and meeting people where they're at. So like going to a public market or to a community fair of some sort or block parties, whatever is being scheduled in different neighborhoods, and really making an effort to reach out to groups and populations that may not normally participate. So it can be done. It takes some creativity and it takes some extra effort.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to what you're saying, Pete. In addition, there's ways that if people want to remain anonymous, other than some of the web applications, there's also mobile phone apps which people can record trips and provide information to agencies or different groups that show, okay, here's the routes that I'm taking or walking or riding, and here's some of the issues. And sometimes those are compiled by different people within different agencies or different applications will compile that information. So there's a lot of anonymous ways for people to provide input if they don't want to do public meetings or don't have the time but want to provide that information. And you're right, Pete, that's like a whole discussion in itself. But I would encourage people to just kind of see what those other sources are.
All right, thank you. And I will add that Pete did do a webinar series with us on how to get more folks involved. And you can find the archive of that webinar series at pedbikeinfo.org/webinars. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for discussion today. I'm sorry if we didn't get to your questions. Once again, presentation slides for today's webinar will be posted to pedbikeinfo.org/webinars within a day or two, and a recording of today's webinar will be posted there within about 2 weeks. You will be receiving an email in the next day or so with a link to download a printable certificate of attendance, which you can use to turn in for your CM credits. Again, we have submitted this webinar for 1.5 CM credits to AICP. Follow us on Facebook to find out if we get approved, if it gets approved. Lastly, there will be a brief survey when you exit the webinar. We do very much appreciate your feedback on our performance today. I want to thank our speakers again, Tamara Redmond, Carl Sundstrom, Dan Neighbors, and Peter Lagerwey. I want to thank all of you for attending today's PBIC webinar.